All right, welcome to our Bible study tonight. As we get into our study of slothfulness, continuing our study of wisdom. Right now, we're at a point where we have finished the technical study of wisdom, the things that we had to go through as we were going through Proverbs, looking at wisdom and what is it. We finished that part of the study. Now we're at a point where we're trying to get into some of the things that are connected, things that if you were to look at the book of Proverbs, you would find that they have some connection to wisdom. That's the stuff we want to get into tonight and the things we want to try to study a little bit. Last week we talked about diligence. We split the message in part because of the fact that there was just so much. When you look at how much information is out there concerning slothfulness and diligence. So I decided, because it was so much, that we'd split it. The downside to that is it meant on Sunday, as I was preaching about some things that really were connected to this, that I had to be careful about how far I went and how little I said at the same time, as we talked about dealing with our problems and not essentially being lazy and putting them aside. So this will be a great tie-in to Sunday's midday message as well. So I give my greetings. I see at least, I know I've got a few people watching, but I have at least one commenting. So I give my greetings to you. I appreciate you being here. And so with that, we're going to get into Proverbs. We're going to read our same text verse we used last week, which is Proverbs 12, verse 24 through verse 27. So that's what we're going to use for a text this week as well. Proverbs chapter number 12, starting in verse number 24. It said, "The hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. Heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop, but a good word maketh it glad. The righteous is more excellent than his neighbor, but the way of the wicked seduces them. The slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting, but the substance of a diligent man is precious. In the way of righteousness is life, and in the pathway thereof there is no death." So you see, there's two times that slothfulness is brought up in this passage we just read. The first one we talked about, again, these verses last week, but the first one gives us our first point as we're talking about slothfulness tonight, and that was verse 24, where it says, "The hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute." Let me ask you, make sure that my fans, I got a fan on me because, as anybody knows, it's hot in Belgium right now. So please let me know if that's too loud or annoying. I'll cut it off, but I set it on the floor and turned it so it hopefully isn't a problem. But the idea being presented, especially if you think about what we said last week about diligence, diligence exalts somebody. Diligence, like wisdom, will help raise somebody up to a place where they'll be successful in the things that they do, that they'll be promoted, that people will have respect of them. Whereas we're being told that someone who's slothful will be put under them. They're the ones who has to pay taxes to the other. They have to pay tribute to the other. And so my first point about slothfulness is that slothfulness is something that brings obstacles in our path. It makes our life far harder than it should be. Now, the irony of that is that when we are slothful, when we're lazy, we're doing it because we're trying to take the easy way out. We don't finish what we're doing. We don't do our jobs. We put stuff aside because we think it's going to be easier that way. But that's the irony of this, is actually you make your life harder. When you take the easy way now, instead of seeing things through and doing well now, when you take the easy way out up front, instead of doing the job well and resting when it's done, you actually make your life harder in the long run. And that's one of the most important lessons I think we can take away from slothfulness and what the Bible teaches about it, is that if we would do our job well, if we'd be diligent now, then we can rest later. And when we rest later, that rest will be sweet. It'll be peaceful because everything's done. And you'll be able to sit down and enjoy, and you don't have to worry about things. But if we try to rest now while the work is still waiting, then what happens is it makes our life harder in the long run, because there's things that need to be done that go undone. And so let me mention, I see Jonas is there in the comments as well. So I give my greetings to you and to Joe. For everybody, I should mention to pray for Joe. She's in the hospital now, and they're in the process of inducing labor. So pray for her that things will go much more smoothly than they have so far. But I appreciate them. Also, at the end, I have another big prayer request I'll put out there for somebody else. Now, saying this, the lesson then is our wisdom. It goes along with the idea that there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death or the ways of destruction. Our wisdom conventionally is that, okay, I rest now, I'll work later. But in reality, if we rest now, work later, it brings problems. If we finish the work and then rest, it brings peace. That's the short answer is what we see about slothfulness. Now, as we study it more, though, it's actually explained in much more detail as to why that happens. So Proverbs 21 is the next passage. Proverbs 15 is the next passage we'll jump over to. It says Proverbs 15 and verse 19, the way of the slothful man is an hedge of thorns, but the way of the righteous is made plain. So he says when someone's slothful, when they're lazy, they're not willing to do stuff, or they're not quick to do it, they're not diligent about things, that their way is like a way of, it's hedged up by thorns. It's like you're putting rows of thorns in your way. You're putting obstacles, barriers in your own path to make your life harder. So that's what he's presenting to us, is if when we're lazy, we put barriers and obstacles and thorns and hedges in our own pathway to make our lives harder on ourselves. Whereas if we do right, then our way is made plain. It's made simple. The barriers are, to be honest, taken out of the way. So there's a statement here that we need to do what's right. We need to focus on doing right instead of trying to take the easy way out of stuff. Then Proverbs 21 and verse 25 says, the desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. So when we start trying to understand what the problem with the slothful person is, you find that one of the problems that comes with being lazy is that your own desires become a burden to you, because you want something. Deep down inside, you have dreams and desires. I mean, most anybody alive in the world has dreams and desires. They have things that they would like to do with their lives, things they want to see. They would like to accomplish this or this or this in their lifetime. But the fact that they're too lazy to do it actually makes their life harder. It makes it a burden to them. And so dreams are supposed to be a help to us. Visions are, when you have a vision, not like visions like you laid down and you slept and you had a dream, but visions like in the sense that you have a vision, a goal, a purpose for your life, that's supposed to be helpful to you. I mean, God says without vision, the people perish. If we don't have a direction in which we're driving our lives, then we perish because of that. We fall by the side. But someone who's lazy, that thing that's meant to help stir life in you, which is a vision, a purpose, or a goal, that thing becomes a burden because of the fact that you desire it, you want it, but you're not willing to do what it takes to get it. And so there's the first obstacle we see presented by Proverbs, is that when somebody's lazy, is the very thing that God says actually helps to drive your life and give purpose and meaning to it, which is having a vision, becomes a burden to you because of those desires and those dreams, that I would love to travel. I would love to, do this. I'd love to have a nice car, whatever it is, that people dream about. Those things that are meant to give you some ambition to get out there and do stuff actually become a burden because you're not willing to get out there and do what's necessary to get it. That's one of the dangers that's being presented about laziness here. So then that's Proverbs 21 and verse 25. We see similar. And I'm going to also talk about the sluggard tonight. I'm not just going to preach on aura and talk about sloths. I'm also going to preach about sluggards as well. And maybe a few people will get that joke, since that's what I always call her as a sloth. But no, we won't just talk about the slothful. We'll talk about the sluggards as well, because the passages are very similar. The terms mean almost the same thing, or they mean the same thing. And so as we look at this in Proverbs 13 and verse 4, we'll look at the sluggard. Proverbs 13 and verse number 4, he says, the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. So I think we looked at this verse last week already, so I won't say a tremendous amount about it. But you see, when you have someone who is a sluggard, someone who's slow to do anything, they're there and they have these desires and they want stuff, but because they're slow to do anything about it, they're inactive about making things happen, they don't see anything happen. Because I'm trusting if you're listening to this, you already understand the principles we built on last week, because that's the way a Bible study works. We laid down foundations last week that while we're not to be living for money and material things and all the worldly ambitions, it's good that you're diligent about your stuff. God tells you to be diligent to know the state of your flock. and to understand, to have a plan for where your finances and stuff are going. It's just that you're not really supposed to trust in those things. You're not supposed to love those things. Those things are just part of your life. And so it's proper that, you make sure you have done the math and you have money coming in to pay your bills and so forth, and you're doing what you need to do those kind of things. If you're somebody who has ambition to own a house, then you should be working towards that goal. But a slothful person or a sluggard is not going to work towards that goal. They're going to desire it. They're going to say, I would love to have a house one day, but not actually be doing anything to own a house. I would love to have a car, but not do anything to own that car. I would love to start my business, but not do something for it. There's so many goals and dreams. It's some simple stuff, smaller things. I'd like to buy a new phone. I would like to buy whatever. But we have to actually, be diligent to work towards them. If we get slothful, then we won't work towards those goals. And I know that anything which you have as a desire can be plugged into the statements I'm making. The house one stands out to me because it's something that I keep trying to work towards and is my goal. Now, saying that, there's a few other verses I want to look at that say similar stuff. So Proverbs 20 and verse number 4. Proverbs 20 and verse number 4, also about the sluggard. It says, the sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg and harvest and have nothing. Here's the thing I want you to notice about lazy people. Many times we think lazy people are just lazy. Like they don't even make excuses. They're just lazy. They don't want to do anything. But in reality, what we're going to find as we run through this a little bit more and study it a little bit deeper is that a lazy person tends to feel like they're just in their laziness. They have an excuse. They have a reason, and they think they're justified in it. And I'm going to be honest, I use myself as an example Sunday. I'll use myself as an example again for this. I am a procrastinator. I'm really bad about doing something, getting a job part of the way finished, and then putting it aside. I was thinking about it last night that I have projects that I'm thinking about doing, but then I think back and realize, well, I didn't finish that other one. How can I start a new project when I didn't finish the other project? And one of those examples would be like JP wanted me to get the Romanian hymnal ready so he could reprint them for me. And then, he'd bring them to me and I'd relaminate them and so forth. And I started on it. I got a good portion of the work done, but I didn't finish it. And so it's hard for me to go and start a new project when I realize I still haven't finished that one. So but you see, when we do like that, when we are notorious for that, which just goes back more to what I preached on Sunday midday. But when we do these kind of things where we don't finish, we don't see stuff through, or we have a lot of dreams and ambitions, but we're not actually doing anything to work towards it, people have good excuses. And this is why I said I will use myself as an example, is I know, like Lori is one of the least lazy people I know. She is somebody who, to be honest, she drives herself crazy sometimes because she doesn't know how to rest. And I can say this about her because I'm pretty sure she's not listening today because she went to go visit some people. But she is somebody who, in general, she doesn't know how to rest. She struggles with that. Whereas I'm somebody, I have no problem. I can prop my feet up and I can rest. When there's a certain limit of what I can take, if there's too much work that has to be done, the time's too pressing, I can't do it. But in general, like if the house is messy, I can still prop my feet up and rest. I'm not so worried about that. And maybe some of that's the difference between men and women. But here's the thing. I know the difference between me and her is a lot of times I'll feel like I'm justified with what is, to be honest, a lazy thing that I'm doing. I'll feel like I'm justified in it. Well, yeah, I don't do this because of that. But in reality, it's just an excuse. And that's where I'm trying to get to. That's why I'm willing to pick on myself for this, is that I know I'm guilty of this, and most of us are guilty of this. Most people are more lazy than we probably realize. But we will make an excuse. We'll say, well, I know I need to plow, but I can't do it today because it's cold. And there's a fine line and stuff. In fact, let me give one that there is a fine line in. When it comes, Lori probably thinks I'm lazy with what I'm about to say, but I do believe I'm just. So maybe I'm lazier than I realize. But when it comes to cutting grass, I won't cut the grass when it's wet. I cut it because I have an electric mower and it's not that strong and I don't want to wear out the motor. But for her, she looks at it like I'm making an excuse. In that case, I don't think I'm making an excuse. But when I don't want to cut it because it's hot outside, or I don't want to cut it because of something like that, that's where I see I'm getting into excuses. Now, I'm not trying to justify myself. I'm just showing where there's a line between, okay, is it legitimate or is it an excuse? And there's where you actually get into some complicated verses in Proverbs. And that's when you start talking about the lion without. And there's where we really start to see that laziness is an issue of the heart. And I'll show you what I mean by that if you don't know the verses I'm referring to. We'll go to Proverbs 22 and verse 13, and then also Proverbs 26, verse 13 as well, because that one expands on this. Proverbs 22 and verse 13, the slothful man saith, there is a lion without, I shall be slain in the streets. Now, think about what we read about the sluggard. He's not going to plow because it's cold. I'm not going to go and I'm not going to plow the ground because it's cold outside. But that's not an excuse. That's something that, okay, you still have to plow. Now, if the ground's frozen, okay, maybe you can wait today and do it another day. But if it's just cold outside, well, you have to plow. It's like today, I got weather reports telling me that certain services in Belgium would be canceled, and certain things wouldn't be in operation the way they should be, or they might be delayed because of the heat. And I'm just going to be honest with you, the heat, as bad as it may feel to us, this is pretty normal, a normal day in Virginia. I was thinking about just before one of the last days I worked at my job, just before I come here, I was welding in heat worse than this. I mean, it was much hotter than this. And I was underneath of a truck hanging upside down welding, and I was pouring sweat at an almost unhuman amount, and to the point where I was about to have a heat stroke. And we still worked. We still kept everything going. None of that really slowed us down. But here, it's a little warm today. We have to stop trains. We have to do all this stuff because they can't run today. And it's amazing to me how quickly we can stop life and shut things down because of a small thing, because of something that's really not that. It's just a little bit of weather. It's just normal. We have to learn to adjust life around this. Now, the reason why I say that and then bring in the lion is if there's really a lion in the street and you decide to stay in your house and keep your family safe, I don't think anybody's going to criticize you for that. But that's why I don't believe that's the intention of the verse. I believe the intention of the verse is you have somebody who is one of two things. Either they're saying that there is a lion when there's not, which is, and to be honest, I don't know that it's just one of the two. I think God's giving us an idea of laziness, and you can apply it in either of these directions possibly. That you have somebody who's so lazy that they don't want to do anything, that they will make up problems in their mind. If I go out there today, then, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and I'm just not going to get anything done. I'm not going to do it today. I'll do it another day. There's a lion without. If I go out there, maybe there's a lion in the streets. Maybe a lion's going to get me if I try to go out today and do something. That mentality is, for sure, at least one of the potential applications of what he's saying in this verse. Would I say maybe another potential application is the fact that if there is legitimately a lion wandering through the streets of your village, and you've got people you care about, then as a man, the first thing you should be doing is rising up to protect them. But instead, he's cowering backwards and refusing to do anything. But the one that really shows that it's probably the first application more so than the second application is if we read the next passage, which is Proverbs 26, verse 13. It shows it's probably more to do with making up the excuse. Proverbs 26 and verse 13. It says, the slothful man saith, there's a lion in the way, a lion is in the streets. As the door turneth upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed. The slothful hideth his hand in his bosom. It grieveth him to bring it to his mouth again to his mouth. The sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason. So the reason why I said that a lazy person feels justified in their excuses is because of that. We know someone who's wise in their own conceit is someone who is not wise but thinks of themselves as being so. They think of themselves as having it all figured out when they really don't, and they think they're justified in these things. So he says a sluggard is wiser in his own conceit. He thinks more highly of himself and his opinions, thinks he's got it more figured out than 7 men who actually can give a reason for what they're doing, who actually have a good reason to do what they're doing. So that statement is what leads me to believe that more so the application of what he's saying here is that it's somebody who, I know I have to go today to work. I have to go to the store. I have to go to the field and do some stuff. But maybe there's a lion out there. I heard somebody say there might be a lion in the street. I don't think today's a good day. I think I should probably wait till next week to go do that work. That's why I believe that's probably more the application of what he's saying. Now, the other hand, though, is the verse in the middle when he says that as the door turneth upon his hinges, so does the sluggard upon his bed, does point back to the other potential application, which is that, okay, maybe there really is a line, but then you should be doing something about that. You shouldn't just be sleeping. And it shows that he's not concerned with it. So he just, like a door turning on its hinges, he just rolls back over in his bed and pulls the blanket over. I can show you what that one looks like pretty easy, because most of us have either done this or know somebody who has done this, that you have woke up in the middle of the night because you heard a noise, and because you were too tired to do anything about it, you just pulled the blanket over your head and went back to sleep. And I'm not going to ask people to admit whether they've done that or not, but most people in their lifetime have done that. For sure, when you're a child, you were too scared to do anything about it, so you just pulled the blankets over your head and went back to sleep. But even as adults, I know a lot of people that have heard noises where it's, like somebody might be in your house. You can't just go to sleep. You got to get up and do something, but they're so tired. It's not about fear. It's about laziness that they don't do anything. They just pull the blanket back over their head, and it's like, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. If they're going to kill me, let them kill me. Just do it quickly. I'd rather get my sleep. And I've actually heard people say that. I've heard grown adults say that was their reasoning. It's like, just kill me now, but I'm not getting up. And so that's what that verse is saying, as the door turneth upon his hinges, so does the slothful man upon his bed. It's that idea of, that I'm not going to get out. If there's a lion in the streets, I don't care. I'm not going to get up. You just let it eat me, but I'm not going to get out of bed. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. That's the kind of mindset it's presenting there. So whichever application you run more towards, like I said, I think there's evidence for both of them within the passage, to the point where I actually see both things in the verse. I don't know that you have to divide one or the other. For me, what I see, though, is that with a lazy person, they are very quick to make up excuses, or to take little things and make them into big things, like saying, oh, it's too cold, I can't go plow. I can't go to the store because it's raining today. I can't do this because it's too hot today. To take things that are just normal parts of life that you have to learn to live with, and make an issue out of that. Now, the other side, though, is like, say, if there's really a lion in the street, okay, I mean, that could be a real issue. That's something that shouldn't be taken lightly. But you see, with the sluggard, it's not the issue that they make it to be, because they turn over on their bed and go right back to sleep. So it's the reason why the lion being in the street it makes them stay home, isn't because it's really the thing that they're trembling and afraid of. It's just a good excuse. And that's what you'll find with a lazy person. There's always an excuse, always some good excuse. And that's why they're wiser in their own conceit than 7 men that can render an answer, who can give a good reason. Because when it comes to someone who's lazy, they always have a reason for why they're lazy. There's always a good excuse for it. And I know, like, I can look at myself and I can find that when I'm lazy about something, I always have a good excuse for it. I think all of us listening to this, if we're honest with ourselves, will admit when we are feeling lazy, we have a good excuse. We've thought of the answer and we figured it out. And whether it's actually a real reason or not, we have something. We have an answer to give as to why. Then Proverbs 19 and verse 24. Proverbs 19 and verse 24 says, a slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom, which we read this, but I was waiting to get to it. It says, a slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Now, we read the second time this is repeated when we read Proverbs 26 just a second ago, and there it tells us that he hides his hands in his bosom, and it grieveth him to bring it to his mouth again. So it's here it tells us that he won't do it. It explains to us there that the reason he won't do it is because it's just too much of a burden. Now, I always compare this to a man that men in general have a habit of, when we sit down, like we'll tuck our hand somewhere comfortable, like at the bottom of our stomach, there at our edge of our lap. Now, I'm going to admit, when it says bosom, that it speaks more to this idea, like you've stuck your hand in your shirt or something like this, or maybe I got to do it higher for the video. But that's when he says stuck your hand in your bosom, he means something more like this, like you've stuck your hand there, you got comfortable and you're not willing to move. Now, I compare it to putting the hand down there on your lap, where your belly meets your lap, because as bellies get bigger, that tends to be where men stick their hand when they want to get relaxed and comfortable, and they don't want to move anymore. But the point of the verse doesn't change either way. The point of the verse is that it's so small of a thing to just pick your hand up and bring, to eat, to pick up food and bring it to your mouth again. But someone who's lazy, it's a grief to him. It's a burden just to have to, I got to pull my hand out of my shirt and, bring food to my mouth again. So what you find is when we let ourselves become lazy, it puts an obstacle, it puts a hedge in our path because of the fact that as you get lazier, you begin to feel more and more justified in your excuses. Littler things become an excuse. Weather, which normally we work around, and that's not a problem. If it's raining, okay, we dress accordingly. If it's hot, we dress accordingly. If it's cold, we dress accordingly. But we still go and live our lives. The lazier we get and the more spoiled we get, the easier it is to use those kind of things as an excuse. I can't leave the house today because it's too windy. I mean, I'll use probably to me what is one of the better examples of that. Churches where I'm from are getting more and more notorious for canceling their services for the smallest of things. Like when I was first saved and started going to church, most churches would not cancel. This is just 22 years ago, going on 23 now. Most churches wouldn't cancel their service even if you had a pretty decent sized snow. Usually the pastor would get out to the church and whoever comes, and if you can't come, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't you use your own discretion. But churches wouldn't get canceled for it. But in time, we got to be where, okay, it's a heavy snow, we'll cancel for heavy snow. Lighter snow, we still won't cancel. Then we got to be where, it's a light snow today. The roads might be a little bit slippery. We'll go ahead and cancel today. Then we got to be where, okay, it's not really snowing, but the roads are a little bit slippery. There's a little bit of ice and rain, and so we'll cancel for this. Then we got to be where, okay, it's too windy today. Because I've seen church services canceled recently in the past few years because it was too windy. And it's like, 22 years ago, most people wouldn't have canceled a church service if you had snow up to your knees. And now we cancel because the wind is too strong. I've seen churches cancel because it was too hot or because it was too cold, either one. And it's like, you see that this is the thing you have to understand about the human flesh. It's never satisfied. Whatever you give your flesh, it's always going to demand more. So if you give a little bit, it's going to ask for more of whatever it is. It's never satisfied with anything. That's why everything can become dangerous or unedifying or put us in bondage or even can become sinful at points, is because of the fact that your flesh will never be satisfied with anything. And what I'm giving you is a testament of that you had pastors who, in that first step of saying, okay, when it's a deep snow, we'll cancel service, had good intentions. Their intention was that I don't want anybody to feel obligated to get to church to wreck their car and get hurt. It's a fair, reasonable thing that they're saying when they say that. Now, I understand people who live here, it's a little bit harder to understand that because especially if you live in the city, it's like, I just walk to church. It's not a big deal. But you have to understand people are driving through mountains and hazardous roads and stuff. So I can understand where that first step come from. There was a little bit of there's some legitimacy. I won't argue how legitimate that first step is. But when you get to the point where church is getting canceled because it's a little too windy, it's a little too hot, it's a little too cold, because there's a hard rain today, because there's a thunderstorm, then at that point we've just gotten lazy about the things of God. But you see, it starts with people saying, okay, I'll take those first steps. And that's where, just so I don't lose anybody on this, that's where we're getting ready to go with these verses, because God tells us it's a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of hands sleep that things start to fall apart. But we make it harder on ourselves is the first point we're trying to bring out here about slothfulness, about being lazy, is because, as you're not dealing with the problems, you're making more problems. You're just making things worse and worse for yourself when we refuse to deal with things. Then as we go back to our text passage there in Proverbs 12 and verse 27, it says, the slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting, but the substance of the diligent man is precious. So someone who's diligent, he's careful for his stuff. He takes care of it. He's not just going to waste it. But a slothful man, even if he put in the half of the work to do half the job and hunt something, he's too lazy to see it through and actually cook what he hunted. And it shows you the danger about laziness. It's not that you don't do anything, it's that you don't finish anything. It's that you don't see jobs through. You do just enough to be able to feel like you did something and then set down. And I think when we look at it in those terms, most of us are far more lazy than we realize. Because God doesn't say a slothful person doesn't do anything. He says a slothful person doesn't finish anything. Now, what happens as you get worse, as you get more slothful, you'll get to a place where you don't do anything. But in reality, slothfulness begins with people who see jobs halfway through and then don't finish them, which again is very close to what we talked about Sunday. Now, Proverbs 18 and verse 9 says, "He also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster." So he's saying it's a kin, it's a very close relationship between someone who is a waster, someone who just doesn't care about the resources, somebody who takes a bite of their food and throws it away, somebody who is very wasteful is very much like someone who's lazy. That there's very little difference between the two of them. Somebody who's lazy is a very wasteful person. And you see that with the verse. I mean, if he doesn't cook what he took in hunting, then he's lazy. He took the time to start a job, but he didn't actually finish it to get the benefits from it. Now, here's where we're going to see this a little bit more, and it gets into some of what I was just mentioning, is Proverbs 24, verse 30. Proverbs 24 and verse 30 says, "I went by the field of the slothful and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns and nettles, had covered the face thereof. And the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that travelleth, and thy want as an armed man." So what is he teaching in that verse? It's not in a moment that you destroy everything in laziness. It's little by little, step by step. Laziness isn't something that destroys everything in a day. Like, you don't just get lazy today and then wake up tomorrow and your whole house is falling apart. Laziness calls us to neglect things, and little by little, those things that we neglect. In this case, it's material, but this is not just a material thing. This is true of relationships and everything else. The more lazy we get and the worse we maintain these things, little by little, they get worse and worse. And so he says, what happened was, I went by the field of a man who was slothful and who lacked understanding. And when I looked at his field, I noticed that, his wall was broken down. Everything was overgrown. There was thorns and nettles everywhere. And everything was just messed up. And I looked at it and I considered, how did it get like this? And he said, I realized it didn't get like this overnight. I realized that it was a little bit of sleep, a little bit of slumber, a little bit of folding of hands to sleep. That one day something broke and he just didn't fix that. He said, oh, I'll fix that another day. And he never fixed it. Well, then something else broke and he didn't fix that either. Maybe in the beginning he was cutting some of the stuff that was overgrowing. But after a time, it just got to be hard. And so, he stopped maintaining it. And as he stopped maintaining things, things got worse and worse and worse. And that's what we do in our lives when we become slothful. As we get lazy, we don't take care of stuff. We don't maintain what we have. And because we don't maintain it, little by little, it starts to break. It starts to fall apart. It starts to crumble. And you think back to my illustration about churches, or my point there, is that you have churches that little by little have gotten lazier on the things of God. Like, okay, we used to go to church, we'd have revival for 5 nights. Well, now we're going to do 3 nights. Now we're going to do 1 night. Now we're just not going to do it. And the spiritual condition of the church decays with each step of that. You used to have churches that wouldn't close for any holidays, like services or services. Whoever comes, whoever doesn't. And we're just going to have church. And then I remember, like in my area, what I noticed was for major holidays, and I don't really consider these major holidays, I'm speaking in terms of the perception of the people. But like for Christmas, they would take off the evening service because, okay, everybody's wanting to be with their family. Or, for this other holiday, they would take off. And to be honest, I've taken off a few, and we may take off stuff here and there. But in general, it's because we've replaced it. We've added something. It's not so much that we take away. It's just that we move it to a different time or something. But there are arguments in that first step. Whenever you're taking the first step of something, there's usually reasons to do or not to do it. But what happens is those churches that say, okay, we're going to take off for Christmas on the Sunday evening and let people spend time with their families. Then Easter, okay, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to celebrate the resurrection of our Savior by telling people to not celebrate the resurrection of our Savior, but go hunt Easter eggs instead. And then after that, it's like, okay, well, Thanksgiving's not uniquely a Christian holiday, but we want you to eat all the turkey you can hold and, celebrate it as gluttonously as we can. So we're going to skip Sunday night church for this too. And then And I'll say this: it's usually Sunday night. Like I don't know anybody who cancels Sunday morning services or stuff. It's always that second service. And the truth is, most of it comes down to pastors who feel pressured by the fact that people go and celebrate with their families. That's why, like for me, I learned a long time ago, if it's me and my family, if everybody else goes home, then we'll still just have church with me and my family, because I'm not doing this uniquely for them. I'm doing it because I feel like this is what God would have me to do. And there's a whole nother argument about where that compromise comes from, but I'm just giving that so you understand it. But what I saw in my area was, while for years that was the comfortable tradition, you take off for usually those 2 or 3 Sundays, Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving. You take off Sunday evening service. Then one pastor in particular I know started taking off Mother's Day and Father's Day for the Sunday afternoon. Then other pastors got that idea and liked it too. And then it got to be where any excuse you could find to start taking it. And then a lot of churches just started canceling it. And I know churches, for example, where a lot of their congregation is older, that they just cancel for the entire winter because it's dark earlier. And they say the older people won't drive out to be at church. But the problem people don't realize is when you start doing those kind of things, when you say, okay, I'm not going to maintain this, I'm not going to do this because it's just not that easy anymore. In the summer, we're just going to close off this part of things and so forth. That in reality, what you're doing is what's being described in this verse. Little by little, step by step, you're letting things overgrow and you're making problems. So, for example, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I don't even know if any of my friends are going to watch this. But if you're closing church for the winter because you have a predominantly older church and they're not going to drive during the winter, then you're also saying we're not going to invite anybody into our church who's not older. We're not going to invite in the next generation. You're sealing the fate of your church. Fania says the sound is gone, so I'm not sure if that's the case or not. No, I just checked it. It sounds like the sound is still there, so I'm not sure. It's just you, Stefania. But what we have to understand is that once you start taking those steps, you won't see the consequences the first day. And this is where you see where, again, prudence and diligence are tied very closely together. You're not going to see the first time you cancel a Sunday night service for something, you're not going to see the immediate consequences. But as you get more and more comfortable with that and it becomes the common and the normal, then it gets to where the Sunday night services just aren't important anymore and people don't feel like they need that. And then as a pastor, you stop putting the time and care into it. I'm giving an example that I relate to. Maybe there's better examples in the world of what I'm talking about, but I relate to this because people don't realize that the consequences spiritually of getting lazy on God. But the same thing's true for your house. I mean, if you... I'll pick on a family member of mine. He's not alive anymore, but I had an uncle who his house, by the time he died, was, to be honest, it's condemned. Like you couldn't go in it. It just, I don't know how he was even living in it. I mean, you wouldn't believe if I get into the details of it, but like you would go in his house, and I didn't go. My brother told me about it because I never even actually got to even go see it. It got so bad because he wouldn't let people inside the house anymore. But it got to a point where his house was like newspapers stacked from the floor to the ceiling because he collected newspapers, but didn't get rid of newspapers. And so when the piles got high, instead of dealing with it, he just kept adding to them and let them pile up. And so you could not move around in his living room anymore. You had giant holes developing in the floors of the house that he didn't do anything about. Literally got to the point where his toilet broke and they just moved it off. It's not that hard to replace a toilet or fix a toilet. In fact, if you've done the work to move a toilet out of the way to expose the pipe in the floor, you've already done most of the work of replacing a toilet. But as far as I understand, he just moved the pipe off and they would use the bathroom into the hole in a floor. I mean, it's really incredible to see what people can get comfortable with and what people can do when we stop taking care, as we let laziness grow. And that's what he's describing in this verse, that the poverty that comes, one, because we make things harder on ourselves, and two, because we become desensitized and uncaring about things so that we don't take care of what we have anymore, that we let it break and get worse and worse until eventually it becomes worthless. And that's what he's describing in this verse. And in fact, Ecclesiastes supports this. In Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 18, it says, by much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. So he's saying when we are too lazy to fix the house, that's what causes the house to fall apart. when we're too lazy to fix our lives, that's what causes our lives to fall apart. When we're too lazy to deal with our relationships, that's what causes our relationships to fall apart. When we're too lazy to deal with the church and cultivate our spiritual health, that's what causes the church to fall apart. I'm assuming you're seeing a pattern here, is that when we're too lazy to deal with the problem or deal with whatever it is, that's what causes it to fall apart. That's what causes it to break and crumble in front of us. And that's what the warning here is about. And then finally, we come to Proverbs chapter 6 and verse number 6, the warning of what we should do. Proverbs 6 and verse 6 says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gather her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that travelleth, and thy want as an armed man." If we won't wake up and realize that we have to get to work and we have to be more diligent in our lives, he says that it's going to come to a point where our poverty is going to come, that our want, our lacking is going to come as one that traveleth. That poverty is going to come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. So one that traveleth is somebody that comes without warning, and an armed man is somebody who comes by force. So he's saying, just like a traveler showing up at your doorstep unannounced, or like a robber breaking down your door, one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be in so much trouble that you don't know what to do if you don't wake up and fix it now. So you can wake up now and fix it, and deal with the problems and get out of the habit of being lazy. Or one day you'll wake up and your poverty is going to have come on you without warning and with much force. So he says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest." So ants are just naturally inclined and geared to work together as a colony, as a system, to bring in the harvest. Nobody has to force them to do that. Nobody has to make them do that. It's just inclined and ingrained into who they are. They are an example of diligence. So they just work. They're not worried about it. They just work and they do what's necessary. And he says we need to go and learn a lesson from that. That sometimes we do have to just put our head down and do the work that's in front of us. We have to stop making up excuses and trying to justify why we don't want to fix it, and actually deal with the problems and fix whatever it is that needs to be fixed. Because if we don't, we're making our lives harder by not fixing it, because we're just adding more problems. And if not, we're also making our lives harder because little by little things are breaking around us and we are wasting away what we do have. So we're losing the resources we have and putting more obstacles in our way. That's what happens when you're lazy. When you try to rest now while the work is not done, then what you do is you waste away the resources that you have, so that now you no longer have that. And you also add more obstacles in your way as those things break and become obstacles and problems. That's why we have to maintain things. We have to maintain our relationships. We have to maintain our homes. We have to maintain whatever it is we have, our spiritual health, all of it. We have to maintain it. We have to be diligent about it, because if we get lazy, then little by little, we're going to make our lives harder than what it ever should have to be. So again, we have to stop making excuses. We have to stop trying to be wise in our own conceit, and just realize that, when there's something, we have to deal with it, and we can rest after. And when we rest after, that rest is sweet. The rest of a laboring man is sweet, the Bible says. All right, I'm going to give a chance for people to ask any questions they might have. And so you're welcome to ask whatever you may have. As you're doing that, I have an announcement of a prayer request to make, and that's for Dr. Baker. Dr. Baker's not going to be making it to Europe. He was supposed to be coming in next week, but he's in the hospital right now. So we've been praying about him, about the stuff with his heart, because I was concerned about him trying to make the trip anyways, because he was going to bounce across Europe for 2 weeks. He was going to be in Italy. He was going to be in Germany. He was going to be in Belgium. He was going to be in England and in Wales. I mean, he was traveling a lot of places in a very short time, many times only spending a day and a half or so at each place. And I thought it would just be too much for him. I know he wanted to do it especially for the missionaries, for his son, for his grandsons, but there's no way on earth he's making it right now. Like I said, he's still in the hospital and should be there for a couple more days at least. So I'm going to ask everybody to pray for him. If you remember, I told you that he had a problem with his heart where he was in the hospital a few months ago. They thought it's okay. It's just something they could fix easy. It's not a problem. They just do a surgery where he stays overnight and then he goes home. And they did that last week. And then after they did the surgery, he went home. the surgery didn't go well, so they knew that, and they knew that they hadn't actually fixed the problem. But he went home, and on I think Saturday, he was right back in the hospital. Had to go straight back because he lost all of his strength, even to the point where the doctor said, if he didn't do something about it, he would probably die from it. I mean, he got pretty rough. So I would appreciate your prayers for him. Right now, he's still in the hospital. They originally thought they might let him out today or yesterday. Then they decided they would keep him for about 3 more days, they said. So for sure, he's not going to make it because of how serious it was, the problems, the complications that came from the surgery. Because of the seriousness of that, his son's not going to come over either. And because his son's not coming, his grandsons are not coming. So just pray for that whole situation. He may still try to come over later down the road. There's some other stuff we're working on to try to make it so it's possible for him to come over and see some missionaries. But that'll be in the future, like next year, more than a year from now, the stuff I'm talking about. So maybe between now and then he might try to work something out. But anyways, that's where we stand with Dr. Baker. So because of that, I'm going to make some changes to some of our other plans as well, like the Bible study in Lummel. I'm going to change some stuff on that. So just so everybody knows, there'll be some changes that, like with the preaching, we won't have the guest preachers. The Bible study is going to change. There'll be several things getting changed up as a result of that. I'd also ask everybody to pray for my brothers. I talked to him last night for the first time in a while. We had to talk on the phone. There's just a lot of needs there that I can't get into, but some things that he needs God to work in his heart and help him with. Concerning the loss of his son and some of the grief and things he's dealing with from that. So pray for him and his family as some of the stuff they're having to work through there. All right, so there's some prayer requests I said I would add. For anybody who came in late, I'll also mention an update on Joe, that Joe's in the hospital right now. They're trying to induce her into labor because of where she had gained too much fluid weight, and then also the baby had started to get too big. So they decided to go ahead and induce her early. As opposed to waiting a couple more weeks, I think it was, or another week or so, whatever amount of time it was. But they decided to induce her early, so they're hoping by tomorrow that her baby will be here, that her and Jonas will be able to have their baby there with them. So pray that everything will go easier than what it has been. It hasn't been going as smoothly as they wanted it to till now. So pray that all that will go easier and that everything will be okay for them. Also, let me remind everybody that there's no church service tomorrow. It's moved to Thursday. So Thursday night we'll be having church. We'll have the barbecue and everything else. So be sure, to plan to be there with us. All right, I don't see any questions coming in. I've talked and bought all the time I can buy you for questions. So I'm assuming nobody's going to be asking any. I do appreciate you being here. Then I'll go ahead and start trying to wind up the Bible study. Let me throw up that little banner there. Thursday, what time? The service starts at 4. That's when I ask people to come, to fellowship and enjoy, spend time, play some games and stuff. That'll be starting at 4. The food will be served at 6. The prayer time will start at 7, and the Bible study itself will start around 7:45 like normal. So the 6, 7, 7:45, that part's normal. The only real change up to the schedule on Thursday is that I'm asking people to come early and enjoy the time together starting around 4. Now, if you have keys to church, you can come as early as you want to. I'm just not advertising for other people to come until around 4. So, all right. Remember to pray for them. Also pray for Rebecca. She's due Thursday. So we'll see how it goes. A lot of times first baby can come a few days late. So we'll see for her if that's what happens. I think she may try and go argue with her doctor because her and Joe are trying to race to see who can have the baby first. So she may go argue with the doctor about it, but we'll see how it goes. But anyways, go ahead and pray for all of them. If you will, because like I said, some big needs there, especially with Dr. Baker and with the babies and all, and even my brother as well. But just pray for all of that, and I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and close out the live stream, though, as I've got to record another video. I'm recording the next Pastors React with Brother Jesse Haley here in just a minute, I think, unless something's changed while I was doing this. But anyways, thank you for being here to be a part of it. Hope it's a help, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday if you're able to be there.